We like to imagine our earliest ancestors as strong. We picture them running across savannas, hunting mammoths, living a pure, natural life. And in some ways, they were incredibly tough. They had to be. But their lives were not pure or easy. They were filled with pain, sickness, and a constant looming threat of death from things we barely think about today. Their world was a world of disease. But what diseases did they actually face? It's not a simple question. We can't just go back and ask them. The evidence is scattered. It's written in their bones, in their fossilized waste, and deep inside their ancient DNA. And by piecing together these clues, like detectives at a scene millions of years old, we can start to build a picture. It's a grim picture, but a human one. It tells the story of our long, hard fight for survival. The first thing to understand is how we even know any of this. The most direct evidence comes from the skeletons left behind. Bones are a fantastic record of a person's life. They show us more than just height and age. They show us suffering. Paleopathologists are the scientists who study disease in ancient remains. They look for telltale marks on the bone. One of the most common things they find is arthritis. Our ancestors were constantly moving. They walked everywhere. They carried heavy loads. They squatted for hours. This constant wear and tear on their joints left its mark. You can see it in the spine, the knees, the hands. The bone becomes pitted and gnarled. It tells a story of a life of hard physical labor, a life without rest. Arthritis wasn't just an old person's problem. It started early. It was a constant grinding pain that many people lived with every single day. Bones also show signs of serious infection. If you got a deep cut or a puncture wound from an animal, bacteria could get in. Today, we have antibiotics. They didn't. The infection could spread from the flesh into the bone itself. This is called osteomyelitis. It creates holes and rough patches on the bone as the body tries and often fails to fight it off. It would have been agonizing. A simple wound that we would clean and bandage could easily become a raging, fatal infection. Sepsis, or blood poisoning, was likely a very common way to die. Then there are the teeth. The teeth are incredibly durable. They often survive long after the rest of the body has turned to dust. And they are a goldmine of information. The diet of our earliest ancestors was tough and gritty. They ate plants with dirt still on them. They chewed on tough meat and sinew. This wore their teeth down, sometimes right to the pulp. Once the hard enamel was gone, bacteria had an easy way in. This led to cavities and, much worse, abscesses. An abscess is a pocket of pus that forms at the root of an infected tooth. The pressure can be excruciating. We see evidence of this in ancient skulls. There are holes in the jawbone where abscesses drained. If you were lucky, it drained and you survived. If you were unlucky, the infection spread into your jaw, your sinuses, or your bloodstream. A bad tooth could absolutely kill you. And without dentists, a toothache wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a life-threatening event. Teeth also tell us about childhood. When a child goes through a period of severe stress, like a famine or a serious illness, the growth of their tooth enamel can be disrupted. This leaves thin lines or pits on the teeth, called enamel hypoplasia. Scientists find these lines on the teeth of our ancestors all the time. It's a permanent record of hardship. It shows that surviving childhood was a brutal struggle. Many didn't make it. Beyond bones and teeth, we have other stranger clues. One of the most amazing is coprolites. Coprolites are fossilized feces. They are a direct window into the gut of an ancient human. And what they show us is that our ancestors were riddled with parasites. By analyzing coprolites, scientists have found the eggs of tapeworms, roundworms, hookworms, and whipworms. These parasites came from drinking contaminated water and eating undercooked or raw meat. Living with intestinal worms was probably the norm. It was just a fact of life. These parasites would have caused chronic diarrhea, stomach pain, and malnutrition. They stole precious calories from people who were already struggling to find enough food. Anemia, a lack of iron in the blood, was likely widespread, partly because of these blood-sucking parasites. People would have felt weak, tired, and listless. It was a constant drain on their energy and their ability to survive. For a long time, bones, teeth, and coprolites were all we had. We could see the effects of disease, but it was hard to name the specific culprit. We could see an infection, but not know if it was staph or strep. That has all changed in recent years because of a revolution in science, the study of ancient DNA. Scientists can now extract tiny, fragmented pieces of DNA from ancient skeletons. They can find not just the human DNA, but the DNA of the microbes that lived and died with that person. This has opened up a whole new world. We can now diagnose specific infectious diseases from thousands, or even tens of thousands of years ago. One of the big ones we found is tuberculosis. TB is a bacterial disease that primarily affects the lungs, but in severe cases it can get into the bones, especially the spine. It causes the vertebrae to collapse, leading to a hunchback deformity. We had seen skeletons like this for years and suspected TB, but ancient DNA proved it. We have found the DNA of the tuberculosis bacterium in the skeletons of Neanderthals and early modern humans. This tells us that TB is an ancient human companion. It's been with us for a very, very long time. It probably thrived when people started living in larger groups, in caves or rock shelters, where they were in close contact. A single cough could spread the bacteria through the group. For our ancestors, with no medicine and bodies weakened by other stresses, TB would have been a slow, wasting death. Viruses are trickier. Their genetic material is less stable than a bacterium's. But we can still find clues. Some viruses have co-evolved with us for millions of years. The herpes viruses, for example, the ones that cause cold sores and chickenpox, have been tracked back through our primate lineage. It's very likely that our earliest ancestors carried these viruses, suffering from the same sorts of irritating and sometimes dangerous outbreaks that we do. We can also make educated guesses about other viral infections. Many of the most dangerous viruses are zoonotic, meaning they jump from animals to humans. Our ancestors were in constant, close contact with animals. They hunted them, they butchered them, they lived in environments teeming with them. Every time they handled a dead animal, they were exposing themselves to a world of unknown pathogens. Things like anthrax, rabies, or early versions of viruses that would later become global killers were a constant risk. A bite from an animal or a cut during butchering was a roll of the dice. Life wasn't just a battle against germs and parasites. It was also a battle for nutrients. The idea of the paleo diet today is a fantasy. Our ancestors didn't pick and choose the best organic foods, they ate what they could find. And sometimes they couldn't find enough. Starvation was a constant shadow. But even when there was food, it wasn't always the right kind. Nutritional deficiencies left their mark on the bones. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a real threat, especially during long winters when fresh plants were scarce. Scurvy causes bleeding gums, joint pain, and poor wound healing. In skeletons, it can cause telltale bone growth around the eye sockets and on the long bones. Rickets, a softening of the bones caused by a lack of vitamin D, was another problem, especially for people living in northern latitudes with less sunlight. Our bodies make vitamin D from sun exposure. Without enough of it, children's bones don't develop properly. Their legs can become bowed. We see this in the fossil record. It's a sign of people trying to survive in a challenging new environment. Anemia from iron deficiency was also rampant. We can see it in bones as a condition called porotic hyperostosis, where the bone of the skull and eye sockets becomes porous and spongy. It was caused by a combination of things: a diet sometimes low in iron, blood loss from injuries, and those ever-present intestinal parasites stealing iron from the body. An anemic person is a tired person, a person who can't run as far or fight as hard. It was a serious disadvantage in a world where physical ability was everything. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the general picture. Small, mobile groups of hunter-gatherers faced a daily threat from injury, infection, parasites, and nutritional stress. Diseases tended to be chronic, things you lived with, or things that killed you quickly after an injury. Big, sweeping epidemics were rare. Groups were too small and too spread out for a disease to really take off and wipe everyone out. If a disease appeared in one band, it might kill them, but it wouldn't be able to jump to the next band 50 miles away. Then, about 10,000 years ago, everything changed. We invented agriculture. This was perhaps the single most important event in human history. It changed how we lived, how we ate, and most dramatically, the diseases we faced. The agricultural revolution was a public health disaster. First, people started living in one place. They settled down in villages and eventually cities. They were no longer moving away from their own waste. Piles of garbage and human excrement accumulated. This contaminated the water supply. Suddenly, diseases that spread through contaminated water, like cholera and typhoid, had the perfect environment to thrive. A single sick person could poison the well for an entire community. Second, people were living packed together. Instead of small bands of a few dozen people, you now had hundreds or thousands living cheek by jowl. This was a paradise for diseases that spread through the air, from person to person. A cough, a sneeze, a single breath could now infect dozens. This is when we see the rise of the epidemic. Diseases like measles, smallpox, and influenza could now sweep through a population, killing huge numbers of people in a short time. Where did these new epidemic diseases come from? They came from our animals. The agricultural revolution wasn't just about farming plants, it was about domesticating animals. We brought cows, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens into our lives. We lived with them. We slept near them. We breathed the same air, and we inherited their diseases. Nearly all of the major infectious diseases of civilization are zoonotic. Measles is thought to have evolved from rinderpest, a disease of cattle. Influenza comes from pigs and birds. Smallpox is related to cowpox. By bringing these animals into our homes, we gave their pathogens a perfect opportunity to jump the species barrier and adapt to a new hostess. For the first few thousand years of farming, our new settlements were disease factories churning out new plagues that our immune systems had never seen before. Third, the agricultural diet itself caused problems. Hunter-gatherers ate a huge variety of plants and animals. Early farmers, by contrast, often relied on just one or two staple crops like wheat, rice, or corn. This new diet was often less nutritious. It led to a different set of deficiencies. A diet heavy in corn, for example, can lead to pellagra, a nasty disease caused by a niacin deficiency. The shift to agriculture also seems to have made dental problems worse. The soft, starchy, carbohydrate-heavy food was worse for teeth than the tough, lean diet of a hunter. Cavities became much more common. One more major disease emerged with farming: malaria. When early farmers cleared forests to plant their crops, they created open, sunlit pools of standing water. This is the perfect breeding ground for the Anopheles mosquito, the insect that carries the malaria parasite. As agriculture spread, so did the mosquito and so did malaria. It became, and remains, one of the biggest killers in human history. This constant, brutal pressure from disease did something remarkable. It changed us. It drove our evolution. Disease has been one of the most powerful forces of natural selection acting on the human population. People who happened to be born with a genetic mutation that gave them some resistance to a particular disease were more likely to survive and have children. Their children would inherit that mutation, and over generations it would become more common in the population. Our own DNA is a living history book of the plagues our ancestors survived. The classic example is sickle cell trait and malaria. Malaria is a terrible disease. It's caused by a parasite that infects our red blood cells. People who inherit 2 copies of the sickle cell gene get sickle cell anemia, a serious and often fatal blood disorder. But people who inherit just 1 copy of the gene have a huge advantage in areas where malaria is common. The sickle shape of their red blood cells makes it difficult for the malaria parasite to reproduce. So they are much less likely to die from malaria. This is an incredible example of evolution in action. A gene that is harmful in one context, causing anemia, is beneficial in another, protecting from malaria. The high frequency of the sickle cell gene in parts of Africa and the Mediterranean is a direct result of the intense pressure of malaria, a disease that became common because of agriculture. There are many other examples. Certain mutations in a gene called CCR5 can make people highly resistant to HIV. It's thought that this mutation became common in Europe because it also offered protection against some other killer, possibly smallpox or bubonic plague. People with blood type O may be more susceptible to cholera, while people with types A and B may be more vulnerable to smallpox. The incredible diversity of our immune system genes is a testament to the endless variety of pathogens our ancestors had to fight off. Every person alive today is a descendant of a very, very long line of survivors. So, when we think about our earliest ancestors, we shouldn't just picture the mighty hunter. We should also picture the person with a fever, shivering in a cave. We should picture the child with a bloated belly full of worms. We should picture the young mother dying from an infected wound. We should picture a family huddled together, terrified, as a new disease sweeps through their village. The story of humanity is not just a story of tools and fire and art. It is also a story of immunology. It's the story of a fragile, soft-skinned primate surviving in a world of invisible enemies. The diseases they faced were relentless. They had infections from wounds. They had parasites from the water. They had tuberculosis in their lungs and abscesses in their jaws. After they invented farming, they faced devastating epidemics of measles, smallpox, and plague. These diseases shaped us in profound ways. They kept our populations small for millennia. They drove us to innovate, perhaps even leading to early forms of medicine and sanitation. And they sculpted our very genomes, leaving a legacy of resistance and vulnerability that we carry within us to this day. Understanding the diseases of our past isn't just an academic exercise. It helps us understand the diseases we face now and the ones that might emerge in the future. It's a humbling reminder that our comfortable modern lives are a very recent, very fragile exception to a much longer, harder story of survival.